Today I'm going to talk about a rebuild of this musical instrument here, which is called a ukelin. My mom passed last March, and my nephew was cleaning out her basement, and he sent me this picture. Said, I found this musical instrument back behind the bar in the basement. Um, so I had no idea what it was. It looked like a psaltery to me, but it had some extra strings on it too. Through the magic of Google Lens, I determined fairly quickly that this thing was called a ukelin and had an interesting history. So I told him, set it aside, it looks like it would be fun to restore. And he replied that I think it's beyond that. A couple months later when I made it up there, I saw what he meant. So when I was able to make the trip and get eyes on the thing, I saw that, yeah, it was in pretty bad shape. Didn't even have a bottom on it. I had to go down in the basement and look through a bunch of boxes to find the bottom of it. This next picture here shows the upper end of the instrument, shows that the soundboard and end block have been pulled away from the sides. That's what 32 string tensions over 50 years in a damp space will do, I guess. The hardware was very badly corroded, as you can see here, and also in the next picture that shows the upper part from a different point of view. You can see that there's a crack in the wood. There's also cracks in several other places in the soundboard. This next picture shows that the soundboard and end block at the lower end of the instrument are also pulled away from the sides. And there's a huge chunk of wood missing from the soundboard at the sound hole. Finally, the next picture, the top part shows the bottom of the instrument. Half of the finish is gone. The bottom part of the picture shows the soundboard, and the upper part of the instrument, the finish is gone there. So now that I knew what I had to figure out what I was going to do with it. And before doing that, I decided I'd look into the history of this thing a little bit to see if that could guide me. So I did what any of us would do. I Googled the word ukelin and saw some sources of information. The most prominent one is Bob's ukelin page. So Google Bob's ukelin page if you want to know more than anyone would ever want to know about a ukelin. It's an awesome source of information. Anyway, these things have an interesting history. They were apparently built between the late 20s and the early 60s, and they were sold exclusively door to door by traveling salesmen. So what these guys would do is they'd put a price on it at 35 bucks and then sell it to people for 12, 17 bucks, making them think they're getting a real deal. But the real marketing ploy was they were marketed as being very easy to play. In fact, they're very difficult to play. So as a result, a lot of these things got sent back, shoved into the attic, pawned at a pawn shop. And nowadays there's a bunch of these antiques out there that nobody wants. And so they go for a pretty reasonable price, 50 to 100 bucks you can buy a ukelin. Google it and see for yourself. There are a few people that are delusional trying to get a few $100 for them. I wouldn't count on it. According to Bob, they found a warehouse of these things a few years back, new in the box. They sold for $50 each. So, given that the fact that the instrument has no real antique value, given the fact that it has no sentimental value, because as near as we can tell, my dad just bought it at an auction back in the 1970s, and given the fact that half of the finish is missing, I decided not to try to restore this as an antique, which is what I'd normally do. Instead, I said, I'm just going to rebuild it from scratch and make it into a nice looking but playable musical instrument that doesn't have any antique value. So with that in mind, it was time to get to work. I began by completely taking the instrument apart down to the individual pieces. I had to scrap the strings. They were too corroded to do anything with. Then I just cleaned up the inside of the instrument. Here I'm working on the soundboard. The next step was to work on the hardware. What I did there was I cleaned those using a vinegar bath overnight and then brushing with steel wool the following morning. This pic shows one of the side guards before the vinegar treatment and one of them after. You can see it worked pretty well. So here I've got all the hardware after it had been through the vinegar and steel wool process. Next thing I did was sanded the sandboard down to the bare wood and then repeated for the back of the instrument. After that, I repaired the cracks in the soundboard by filling with wood glue and clamping. And then I straightened the warp in the soundboard by spritzing it with some water after heating it with a heat gun and then placing it between two ceramic plates. So after all that, it was time to rebuild the thing. I put everything back together. I finished it with a few coats of boiled linseed oil, followed by a couple of coats of General Finishes gel top coat. Also, I made a wide walnut rosette and put it over the bottom sound hole, and that hides the chunk of wood that was missing. So now that the ukelin was finished, it was time to string it up. So I went to the web to look for sources of ukelin strings and only found one. You guessed it, Bob's ukelin page. So I ordered a set of strings from Bob, cost about $100, which is probably more than the instrument's worth. But it's really not a bad deal when you consider there's 32 strings. Now, not only that, these strings came individually packaged as chord strings or melody strings. And for each string, the envelope tells you exactly where on the instrument to place it. So when you couple that with the instructions that were very good, it is a very straightforward procedure. The only other thing I had to do was buy this zither tuning wrench on Amazon to turn the tuning pegs. So I started the tedious procedure of stringing it up and bringing it into tune, which takes a while because of the string stretching. But finally got it done. So here's some before and after pics of the final rebuilt instrument. The bottom part, the top part, and the whole thing. Now, if you've made it this far, you're probably a little bit interested in what it sounds like. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you what the different strings do, and then I'll play a short demo. So the ukelin has 32 strings. 16 of them are used for chords and 16 for melody. The chord strings are here, and those are in groups of 4. So it's set up to play 4 chords, which you strum with your thumb. And then you've got 16 melody strings up here that get you 2 octaves plus 1 note. And by using these guides here, you can play individual notes really easily with a bow. Okay? So the chord tuning, standard chord tuning, seems to be a C chord, an F chord, a G chord, and then a D chord. I guess this is set up this way because it would allow you to play songs in both the key of C and the key of G. Now the melody notes, those are played with the bow, and they have only the white notes on the piano keyboard. They don't have the black, sharp, and flat notes. So those go like this. So the way to play it is to play the melody notes with the bow and then strum the chords with your thumb. Now, I'll give you a brief demo next, but don't expect much. I've been playing this thing for all about 2 hours. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed seeing this somewhat odd instrument being brought back to life.